What's up, everybody? It's Goddess Z, and I'm here with another episode of Holistic and Spiritual AF. Welcome back, fam. If you are tuning in again, I appreciate each and every one of you. This podcast is growing, and it's just because of listeners like you. We can be found everywhere on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, pretty much anywhere that podcasts are syndicated. And this podcast was airing every Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I think I had just changed that back in last year sometime. But actually, as of today, this podcast will now be going back to two podcast episodes a month. I'm really excited about that. I'm still going to be having guests on as well. So it'll be myself coming in with downloads and transmissions on the fourth Fridays of the month and a guest coming in on the second. And yeah, that's just because life has been like growing in some amazing ways. And I'm also going to be spending and dedicating more time to the community, the holistic and spiritual AF community that's also growing as far as classes and some other amazing things that spirit and my ancestors are pushing me forward. So this podcast ain't going nowhere. Okay. We've been doing this since 2022. We're gonna keep it going. We're just going to bring down the cadence a little bit to something that is more manageable for my life right now for some of the amazing things I got going on. Okay. So if you are new and this is your first time landing on this podcast, you are still in the right place because we talk about all things such as how to connect with your ancestors, how to access your divine feminine codes, metaphysics, esoterics. My guests come in dropping their wisdom and their knowledge as well. And it's always, we don't disappoint over here. Okay. So if you want to stay connected to me outside of the podcast, you can check me out at holisticandspiritualaf.com. And I have all sorts of things over there, classes, books, consultations, newsletter. You'll be able to actually stay in contact with us and go behind the scenes where we start to create these containers where there's the real healing is actually happening. So there'll be another class coming up soon. If you missed the last one, that one was fire. Okay. So definitely stay connected, y'all. All right. So I'm going to jump into today's episode because I said I wasn't going to be doing all that long talking in the beginning like I used to do. And today's episode is going to be episode 82, y'all. That's wow. We're talking about the mother wound and the women who raised us. All right. So this is going to be one of those deeper episodes that are powerful, that may actually get you to start to things to come up for you, and that's okay, because that's what we're doing here. We're talking about healing. We're not talking about blaming. We want to be able to have some awareness. We want to start understanding, and most importantly, breaking cycles. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the mother wound today, and the women that raised us. But like I said, for some people, it may bring up some sensitive areas, maybe not necessarily during this podcast, but maybe afterwards. And, there may be some things that start to tap places inside of you for healing. So, for that, if you want to go deeper on that journey, I will definitely say make sure you stay connected with me. Check out the website. Reach out to me. I offer consultations and things like that. So I can help to assist you on that journey as well. So you're not just kind of out there, stuck in the pain part. All right. So, number one, let's go into the definition. If you know me, I'd like to break things down. I like to let people know what it is that we're talking about. And I always take everything from an Afro-Indigenous perspective because that is who I am. That is where my lineage comes from. So, my ancestry can be traced, obviously, Native American on my mom's side, on my dad's side, African and Caribbean. Okay, so I call myself Afro-American, and I work with Afro-Indigenous women across the diaspora, whether that be African American, Africans, Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latinos. That's who I'm working with, particularly women. I don't turn down any guys, of course, but mostly if the containers and the classes and stuff like that is women. Okay. So yeah, let's jump into it. So the Western definition is always going to be majorly different than the Afro-Indigenous perspective. I won't say it's majorly different. I'll say it's just about 1% of what we're actually talking about. And then the Afro-Indigenous definition always kind of goes in deeper on a more esoteric level, and a more holistic explanation. All right. So the mother wound from a Western definition is going to be talking about emotional, psychological, and behavioral problems developed from the relationship with our mother or our primary caregiver. So that could be the mother figure in your your life, okay? And this can include things like abandonment, emotional unavailability, criticism, control, lack of nurturing, inconsistency, and these wounds essentially shape how we love, trust, attach, receive, and see ourselves, okay? So as you can see, that's kind of more of a psychotherapy type of approach, which is pretty much what you're going to get on the Western side of things. Now, from an Afro-Indigenous perspective, we go deeper than just the psychology. So, from an Afro-Indigenous lens, the mother is not just an individual, she is part of the lineage. So, the mother wound is ancestral pain that's carried through women, survival patterns passed down, and emotional memory held in the body and the womb. So, sometimes what you experience from the mother didn't necessarily start from the mother, okay? It ties this lineage memory as a body, as an archive. So I always talk about tapping into what's inside of your DNA. We recently did an episode on epigenetics, so that ties a lot into what it is that we're talking about. But I think, I'm going to take it a step further on that one because the mother is an extremely integral part of pretty much everybody's life, okay, whether you're Afro Indigenous or not, but that's what we're talking about here. And the mother is the one who brings forth your life into this realm. All right, so and that's whether you're a mother yourself or you have a mother. Okay, so the womb that we carry is such a powerful mechanism and a part of who we are, and it stores a tremendous amount of information inside of our DNA that ties us back to lineage to lineage to lineage. Okay, so the womb is a very powerful part of our being in our bodies. Okay, it's more than just housing babies and the other things that the functionalities of it. Okay, but you just think about it, it's an ancestor coming through the portal of a woman's womb into this life. All right, so it's a very impactful relationship that we have with the mother, that's not just the physical side of things but also very spiritual and also very ancestral. All right, so I broke down the two definitions. Now I want to talk about what that actually looks like in real life. All right. So the mother wounds can show up in a lot of different ways. So in relationships, it can be fear of abandonment, anxious or avoidant attachment, overgiving and people pleasing, and choosing emotionally unavailable partners. Now, those are all like easily said, but they're patterns. Okay, I think that's the most important part about this is their patterns, and it's based on things that we've seen and the programming inside of us that we've began to condition our way of living, as survival patterns. Okay, I talk about that all throughout different episodes, and so the things that we see from our mother or the things that we hear and we experience from our mother often shapes the way that we deal with the world on the outside. So we're going to do another episode on the father wound, okay? But a lot of the healing that we do starts with, if you go back to the root of everything, the root of it is going to be the mother and the father, some sort of a way, because these were our most influential and impactful relationships that we ever had before we started having relationships with other people. So it would only make sense that these types of wounds that are also created from the pain that we received in those relationships, whether it were conscious or unconscious, is going to impact our entire life, and we can go on having these survival patterns, and we can have these things programmed in our DNA that we don't even recognize, and we're unconsciously living out and behaving these types of things, right? So, in self image, this can also show up as low self esteem, low self worth, perfectionism, overachieving for validation, feeling not enough. All right. Now, well, we can give a couple of different examples. Fear of abandonment is obvious. If you came up in a household where you were always abandoned, or people didn't look after you and make sure that things were taken care of and your needs were met as a child, then you could definitely have abandonment issues. Over giving and people pleasing. If you had an experience in a relationship with your mother where everything that you did was never enough, and you were constantly seeking validation and approval and appreciation, then you're going to start to do what? Probably choose emotionally unavailable partners because your program is so used to and connected to not receiving that, like actually getting that, you don't know what that is. So you're constantly picking these people that are very similar to the pattern that you grew up with. And you don't even know why. You know what I'm saying? And essentially, if we don't start to look at these things and begin to start to heal these processes with inside of ourselves, we can unconsciously pass them on to our children, just like sometimes our parents, our mothers, unconsciously pass that on to us. Okay. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later. And before we do, I think it's important that I give a disclaimer that I am not a therapist. Okay. I am not a therapist at all. I am not giving medical advice of any sort. If you feel like you need to go seek out professional help, then by all means do that. I am a proponent of getting that extra help as well, in conjunction with working on yourself on the spiritual side of things and ancestrally. Okay. So I think that's important to say. But I do have a lot of experience with healing generational trauma. And I've talked about that several times before, and helping others to also break through certain patterns in their life as well. Okay. So that's the perspective I'm coming from with it. All right. Um, Now back to the topic at hand. Self-image, the way that that can show up, low self-worth. If you heard negative, abusive kind of things about the way that you look, maybe it was your weight, maybe it was the clothes that you wear, maybe it wasn't that you heard that you were pretty enough. Things like that. Perfectionism, always having to do everything right, or you're going to get yelled at, or something's going to happen, and having this anxiety that we talked about, and feeling like everything's got to be perfect. And then essentially, this ties back into the other one, overachieving for validation. So, in the top, we had overgiving and people pleasing. Now we're overachieving, how I need to show up, and I always have to be the best because I need validation. And that's something that I carried with me for a while as well. And I did not realize that that pattern was there. Okay. I was always like a go getter. I was always trying to accomplish things and do things. And I would always have this sense of, look at me, look at me. I wanted everybody to be able to see what it is that I was doing, because I was seeking that outside validation from other people, because I don't feel like I received that enough. And I understand today why. But yeah, so it can show up like that, and then not feeling enough. So even with all this overachieving and needing validation, it's still never enough. You never feel like it's enough, because that external validation that we're seeking is actually what we need to be receiving from for ourselves on the inside. Okay. It's imperative that we fill our own cup up, okay, and not expect other people to do it, because other people can't do it. Other people most likely aren't going to do it because they're battling their own wounds. All right. So a lot of those patterns that we just described, a lot of them come from mother wounds, depending on the type of relationship that you have with your mother. All right. So now in the body, because we do everything holistically over here as well, it shows up as nervous system dysregulation. Everything that I just described is a nervous system that's out of whack. It's like a yo-yo. It's up, it's down, it's sideways, it's this way. It's never balanced. It's never comfortable. It's never calm. It's never peaceful. It's always active. Hyper independence. Oh, okay, I got it. I got it. Somebody who may have been abandoned all the time, who learned how to survive by doing things themselves, may not be able to receive help. When a person genuinely is trying to help them, it may be difficult for them to allow other people to help them. And that hyper independence, there's nothing wrong with being independent, um, but hyper independence, or too much or too little of anything, is an issue. Okay. Things should be in balance. Okay. In order for us to be at a certain state of consciousness and frequency. All right. So let's see, what else do we have here? Inability to rest. Okay, that's going to tie into nervous system dysregulation and always being in survival mode. That's another one. Okay, so maybe you just not overachieving. Maybe it's not hyper independence, but it's always, always, always on the go. Always got to protect myself. Always got to be right. Always got to this. And all of that ties into nervous system dysregulation. But a lot of what that ties into, and only you can really think about the patterns in your household, and how you were raised. And on the mother side of things, most likely it's going to come from one of those two. Like I said, either the mother or the father wound. Okay. So for some people, this may not be resonating with you. Some people, this may be spot on. Okay. And if it resonates with you, take what you need and leave the rest. Okay. And a lot of times, what we do with these things is we turn it into, oh, that's just my personality. when in actuality, it's an adaptation. Okay. It's you adapting to your survival patterns. It have adapted to the program that you received growing up. This is what you learn to kind of deal with in order to live, to survive. So you started creating these little patterns and these things here that created these other dysfunctions inside of you. And over time, like I said, you don't have a clue that you're doing it. You just say, hey, this is who I am. This is my personality, right? And it may be working for you. But at the end of the day, when some people who are allowed to get close to you start to call some things out that you may not have been able to see, then you kind of have to look at things and you have to kind of really start to do that shadow work. Okay. And this is where shadow work is not cute and it's not freaking exciting and it's not fun because it requires looking at this shit. All right. It requires looking at this stuff. It requires memories. It requires feeling the stuff. And a lot of times people don't really want to do that. Okay. So now I want to go into Black women and the lineage here, okay? And this is where we have to be honest about the context of what we're talking about because Black and Afro-Indigenous women come from lineages where survival was constant. Like survival was necessary. There was like no other way to be. Rest was not available. They were overworked. They had to take what they could get, things like that, because the dynamics were quite different. Now we have a lot more choice. Now we can talk about healing. Now we can have the space to be able to start to talk about ancestors and things like that. Now, a lot of us have jobs where, we're not in constant, we do have the ability to rest and go on vacations and things like that. Also, some of our earlier maternal um, influences, emotional expression was also unsafe, all right? And nurturing was interrupted. All right. So you can't expect somebody who never really was nurtured themselves to be able to nurture you without actually healing that part of themselves. But a lot of times we don't see it like that. We just know the pain that we've gone through. We just know what we experienced. And we feel like, well, why couldn't they do this, and that? And that's why we talk about healing. Okay, I'm always on the healing side of things. And then we also talk about healing ancestral trauma because we'll get into that deeper. A lot of this stuff is embedded and stored into the mother as well. Um, so our mothers had to be strong instead of soft. They had to provide instead of nurture, particularly single mothers, protect instead of emotionally connect, and endure instead of process. All right. Now, so when we're talking about Afro-Indigenous dynamics, not for everybody, obviously, but for a lot of us, we were raised by single mothers. I was a single mother at a certain point with my daughters as well. And you have to take on both of the roles. Okay. You got to be the nurturer, you got to be the protector, the provider, the disciplinarian. You got to be the nurse, the maid, the everything, right? And so sometimes we fall short, because it's too much. It's overwhelming. The family dynamic and structure has been interrupted, and it is not able to flourish and grow as it should because like I said, it's missing that other component and piece of having that father, divine masculine there in the household. So a lot of that is not necessarily the mom's fault. It's just the survival pattern that she had to adapt to in order to be able to raise some kids and make sure I keep a roof over your head. You got food to eat. And hey, I've done my job. But a lot of times the nurturing isn't there because they just don't have any left to give. They don't have the capacity for it. Okay. So what gets passed down is not just the love, but what we also see in that dynamic is we see hyper independence. Okay. So for me, in my situation, I saw women running shit. Like that's what I saw mostly is I saw women, my mother in particular, being someone who took care of business, made sure that we had things, moved us out of the projects into upper middle class. And so I saw somebody who was hyper independent, and before you know it, it's like, well, I got to be somebody that takes care of myself. I got to make sure that I can cover everything and that everything is covered. We don't realize that these programs are what we've seen when in actuality that was her way of showing love, which we needed that too. You know what I'm saying? We needed to make sure that we were provided for as well. but the nurturing piece may have been missing there. All right. So, emotional suppression, not really being able to talk about how I feel and what's going on with me, but instead having outbursts, So, a lot of times that's what happens when we stuff and store things down into the body. There has to have an outlet at some point. And so, that emotional suppression is something that we may have seen. Over responsibility. I got to do everything. Now I can't get nobody to help me. I got to do everything myself. And now we're stressed out and we're mad and we're taking it out on people. All right. All of these things are not uncommon in Afro-Indigenous single mother households. All right. And maybe the mother is in a relationship, but she's still the one doing everything. Okay. Um, so, yeah, your mother may have loved you deeply and still not had the capacity to nurture you the way that was needed. All right. So, I think that is the part where we start to kind of move into healing. When we first, it's all about looking at, hey, what was done? What did I miss? What type of patterns did that create for me? And I talk a lot about in my book, The 5 Stages of Shadow Work. The first stage is always going to be awareness, because first of all, if you're unconsciously doing things, you have no idea, you're not aware of the patterns, you're just doing these things, and then all of a sudden maybe someone calls it out, or maybe it's just you saying, okay, why am I like this? Like, why am I so, always got to get everything done? Why can't I allow somebody to help me? Why am I always looking for validation? Why am I always trying to top this, top that? Why am I not able to rest? And you start to have the awareness that something is off, something is amiss, and somewhere along the line, something got shifted, right? And so that awareness is going to be that first stage of shadow work. Okay. So be sure to check that out if you're interested in that. I have that on the website as well. Um, but then we start to look at things a little deeper when we look at the patterns, and then we start looking at and looking at the roots of things, and like, where did this stuff originate from? And we start thinking about how we grew up, and we realize at a certain point, when we get to another stage in the 5 stages of shadow work, very close to the transformation stage, that a lot of times our parents did the best they could, and they didn't have the capacity to give something. A person can't give what it is that they don't know how to give. And that's kind of where the healing process starts to come in. All right. So that's when we start to realize that, hey, this is not just about me or what was done to me. This is about, hey, what was done to her? Like, what happened to her? What was her mother like? What was it truly like growing up in that household? And then on top of that, the further back you go, you also have the heavy racial dynamics as well. You've got the civil rights era, you've got Jim Crow era before that, you've got ancestors fresh out of slavery, and then you've got slavery. So there's a lot of shit that's stored in these wombs and in the DNA of us that gets passed down as survival and is inside of us as well. For us to be able to have this opportunity to be able to start to break some of these cycles, and like I said, when I started this, not in a way that is like I'm here to blame anybody and I'm here to talk about what it is that you did to me and you shouldn't have done that and all of that. It's not about that. It's about being able to recognize things in ourselves, and where the patterns came from, and start to begin to create a new way of being so that our children see something different. We have that opportunity because our mothers went through things in order for us to survive, so that each generation could be better. So at the end of the day, you still kind of have to look at them and be appreciative of it. So a lot of times I'll see people on social media that are like blasting they family out for stuff that they went through, and they mad, you know what I'm saying? And I look at that and I always know, I'm like, okay, there's still some healing necessary. There's still in that anger portion of it, right? But essentially, that anger portion is going to wear you down. It's going to wear you out, okay? Trying to be in a position to always talk about what you did, and you did this to me, that just keeps you stuck. It keeps you looping. It keeps you looping in the same pattern of pain and trauma. And that's not what we want. We don't want to live like that. We want to be free. Okay. So that's the purpose of this episode. And that's the purpose of healing and breaking generational trauma. And like I said, it's not easy. It's painful at times, getting to the other side. That's shadow work. That's stuff when people disappear, the dark night of the soul, you don't see them for a while. And it's because they're working through this shit. Um, so definitely, just understand that a lot of times our parents did not have the capacity to nurture the way that we may have needed. All right. That's the complexity of it, but that's the awareness, and that's the part that kind of gets you through the arch that allows you to start to say, okay, maybe there is a different way. Maybe I don't know exactly what that looks like and how to do it, but I'm willing to try. Okay. So now I want to go into the science and spirit connection. All right. Because I talk a lot about spirituality and healing, but I also talk a lot about metaphysics as well. And I had another episode about science versus spirituality. So check that out as well, because that was a dope episode where we kind of broke down the differences and very much similarities of the two and how the two kind of interweave into to each other. All right. So our experiences like the trauma, stress, and emotional suppression can be passed down through generations. We just talked about that, not just behaviorally, but biologically. All right. And we talked about that in the epigenetics episode. Like this has been proven. When I talk about that, our DNA is a database of information, right? It's a database of the spiritual gifts that we hold, the amazing things that our ancestors did. So why would it not also be the same for the traumas as well? Somebody has to break the pattern. Okay, somebody has to be the one to say enough is enough. And there's all sorts of stuff and creepy crawlers inside of our lineages, and we know what we're talking about. All right. So biologically, this has been proven. Scientifically, this has been proven. And what happens is the nervous system learns what is safe, what is dangerous, and how to respond. So the nervous system is very abstract. It's not analytical where it's trying to break down and process and understand things. It's very basic survival, the way that it functions. So it's like, listen, is it safe? Is it dangerous? And how do I need to respond? How do I need to stay safe? And that's what the nervous system does. It finds these ways of surviving, so and it's just kind of like an automatic response. It's an automatic response until it's trained and reprogrammed a different way. And that's why a lot of times when we start the healing process, and we begin to consciously start to change things, we slip back into the old pattern because now the nervous system is saying, well, what the hell are you doing? Because we've been doing this all this time. Now, why are we going over here? I don't know if that's safe. I'm going to what's normal. And so it requires some effort actually to start to respond and train the nervous system to respond a different way as well. Okay. From an Afro-Indigenous reframe, our ancestors didn't call it epigenetics. They understood the womb carries memory, the body remembers, and the spirit holds lineage. So, what you feel in your body sometimes is not just yours, it's inherited. It's inherited. A lot of times there's been circumstances and instances where people who may not have even known their actual birth mother or father still carry some of the characteristics and traits and behaviors and body language as their biological parents. And that's because of the memory that's stored in the DNA and in the body. All right. So that also is proof of that we inherited this. So now this is the part that requires the accountability, right? At some point, and I talked about this briefly up at the earlier. At some point, you got to stop blaming your mama. I'm just gonna say it just like that because at some point we got to get mature enough to say that it's up to me. Like I can't sit there and be like blaming my mama for my entire life, and I did that for a while. I did that for a long time, too long, honestly. And it wasn't until I began to start healing that my life like changed dramatically, like dramatically. Like everything that I was trying to accomplish with my healing, the bulk of it happened when I began to heal this wound, okay? And not just say that I wanted to, but actually go through it and heal it. And I also want to say this for some people too, because I don't know what your circumstances are and what it was like. But some things require healing and moving on. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to come back and try to keep a relationship with this person. This healing process is for you to break generational cycles and to be able to show the next generation a different way. But essentially, what's going to need to happen, and this is the hard part for some people, is you got to stop waiting for the stop blaming your mama and stop waiting for your mother to become who you think you needed them to be, okay? And become better for yourself. Be that for yourself. The bottom line is you're healing. A lot of people before you, they're not. Okay, so if you're still waiting on them to be the mother that you wish that you had when you were a kid, it just keeps you in that loop. It just keeps you in that cycle. It keeps you just constantly repeating patterns and not actually getting to the other side, to the healing side of things. All right. So yeah, that's just the long and short of it. It's like, um, you got to stop blaming your mama and you got to stop waiting on them to be who you needed them to be and become that for yourself. So not in a cold way, not in a callous way, but in a sovereign way. All right. In a way where you begin to embody healing. All right. And as you start to do this, this healing is not about changing your mother. It's about changing your relationship to what you experienced. Okay. We can't change other people. We can only change ourselves. And we also can't change what happened, what we saw, what we experienced, but we can change our relationship with it, how it affects us, okay? And that takes time. That's not a one and done, all right? That's why I said for some people, if your pain and your roots to it are deeper, then definitely this is a time that you're going to want to get that outside help and in conjunction with what it is that you're doing on your own spiritual help as well, okay? Because some stuff is heavy, so I'm not even going to sit here and act like it's not. All right. So, how do we begin to heal? All right. I talked about the awareness being the first step. All right. Recognizing the patterns, naming what the wound is. Just very simple, and it doesn't have to be super complicated where you're trying to unpack everything all at once. Your spirit will know. Your spirit will know what is necessary and when it's necessary. But that awareness is going to be the beginning. And so what you'll start to do is you start to recognize patterns all over the place. Oh, why did I notice I did that? You know what? I didn't even know I was doing that. Like, have I always been doing that? So yeah, that awareness and recognizing the patterns and then naming the wound. What is that? Oh my gosh, why am I seeking validation? You know what? I really don't feel like my self-worth is where it should be, things like that. Now you're starting to name it, okay? Before it just was a pattern. Now it has a name. The second thing is going to be compassion, understanding her context. Really setting back and thinking about what it would have been like to grow up during that time, asking some questions if you can about what the family dynamics were. This is kind of like what I talk about a little bit about how to connect with your ancestors. And I say start with your bloodline first and start asking people in your family, and people like, oh, they don't care. Once you start asking questions, stories will come out. Like they'll just start remembering things themselves. And some of those stories will be like, oh, wow, I never knew that. And some of them will be like, oh my gosh, no wonder. Like, what else happened to you? You'll start hearing things that you may not have ever heard before, and it'll allow you to start having compassion. You'll have enough room inside of yourself at a certain part of healing that you'll be able to understand. Um, Not necessarily with excusing harm, but you'll have more compassion for what somebody else went through. Okay. Another thing is reparenting yourself. All right. We talk about the inner child and healing the inner child wound. This is what we're talking about. Like I said, everything always ties back to mama and daddy somewhere. So that inner child, that little child was wounded somewhere along the way where it learned the pattern that it's not safe. I need to protect myself. I have to count on me. These types of things. So learning to reparent ourselves is going to look like giving ourselves what we never received. And I think this is very interesting because I recently had a conversation with a friend that I reconnected with, um, you know, and we knew each other like way back since I was like 10. And he said, one of the things I love about you is the fact that you give yourself that adult child in you that's super excited about stuff, that's like happy about things, is you giving yourself the love that you didn't get, that you needed as a child. And I was like, yeah, that's my inner child. I spoil her. I make sure that she's seen. I make sure that she's heard. I make sure that she knows that she's important and things like that. So you start to reparent yourself. You start to self love, as some people may say, to just really start to fall in love with myself. This is going to help with that overachieving and needing validation from other people. You'll start to come from an internal place. Okay. It'll be about what's good for me. What is it that I need to do for me? Is it that I need more rest? Do I need to get a pedicure? Is it that I just want to sit here and do what I want to do? Take myself out to eat? These different things that allow you to be kind to yourself, to start to reparent yourself and give yourself what you didn't receive. This is also going to be healing to that inner child wound. All right. Emotional safety, honoring your boundaries, respecting your boundaries, and allowing yourself to be safe emotionally. And that also looks safe to express your emotions as well. Now use your discernment here, use that spiritual discernment, and make sure that it is a safe space that you can actually do this. That's a big part of why I'm doing the focusing more on the classes and the offline activities, because those are safe spaces for sisters to come in there and really talk about things that they probably never get to talk about, and it's a safe space because we're all in there doing this together. So emotional safety and emotional expression is very good. Make sure you're validating yourself. Make sure you big up in yourself, giving yourself the praise and appreciation that you never received and that you deserve. And I always say rest. Why? Because the body, the nervous system needs that. The nervous system in an overdrive is just constantly on survival mode, watching out to be protected. And so give yourself that rest, allow yourself to the peace to be able to just be, and whatever that looks like for you. But this is going to be a form of reparenting yourself. Then, of course, body work. Body work is important because, like I just described, a lot of this stuff is stored in our body, in our tissues, and so somatic awareness is going to be important. Moving, stretching the body, walking, getting out in nature, allowing the body to release things that may be stored inside of the body as well. And also noticing any types of triggers, notice the tensions in your body as you begin to rest and your nervous system becomes regulated more, and you start to have more contact with your internal realm. You're going to notice things. All right. So before, in the awareness phase, we were noticing patterns. We were naming the wound. Now in the body side of things, we're noticing our body responses as well. And this is going to help us to begin to start healing things. How are you feeling when you're around your mother? Is something, do you get tensed up? Like, what's going on? Is it time to go? Is it time to hang up the phone? These types of things are going to allow you to start to heal that mother wound. Okay. And this may not even be around your mother, because remember, these patterns show up all in our life. So we may start noticing things when we're at work. We may start noticing things when we're with our mate or whatever it is. But pay attention to what's going on inside of you, because those are going to be indicators of what's necessary next. And we regulating the nervous system. We already talked about that through rest and meditation. I had to throw that in there. Okay. And then, of course, ancestral healing. All right. Of course, I had to bring up the ancestors. I haven't talked about the ancestors much in this episode at all, which is unlike me. But connecting with your supportive ancestors who will absolutely assist you in this phase, because that's what it's about. They're going to be like, what? You trying to heal the generational trauma that we never got a chance to? They will definitely assist you with that. Okay. And so that's going to look like whatever it looks like for you, because once you tap it into your ancestors, it's going to be very specific and unique to you. I mean, you can start working with your ancestors to begin to release what is not yours. Because remember, some of this stuff that's stored in you may not necessarily come from your mother. It could come from the mother before, So you want to begin to release these things that are not a part of your assignment, that do not belong to you, and your ancestors are definitely going to be able to help you with that. Okay. So hopefully you guys got some value out of that. Like, the whole point of this episode was not, like I said, to bash anybody's mama, to make them feel more sad, but to just talk about the fact that there is another way. And I recognize as Afro-Indigenous women, a lot of us have had very um, awkward, dysfunctional, uncomfortable relationships with our mothers, and we have gone on to carry that pain for far too long. And so there is a way to be able to start to heal that, and that's the whole purpose of this, because we grown. Okay, let's face it, we grown. We not sitting here talking about what happened to us when we was 10, and we grown as hell with kids and everything. It's like we have to start to begin to heal this stuff. And for those of you who are younger, even better, because now you get an opportunity to start working on yourself before you have children or while your children are young, and to start to give your children the things that you didn't receive, that your mother was incapable of giving based on the capacity that she had to give it. So very, very important stuff, and very grown work that we talk about here, and a high level of shadow work. Okay. But I will tell you this, my experience with that was, once I got around to this side, when I finally healed so much other stuff, because I was skeeting and skating around that, and I was like, okay, we're going to do something else. Let's heal that instead. And I finally got to that. Oh my goodness. You talking about breakthrough, and my life began. It was like my life began, and the dynamics in the relationship with my mother changed. And so, that is what healing looks like. All right. That type of healing and that type of break of generational trauma, we got to be ready for that. And you have to be ready for that. Now, it's not for everybody. That's why I said some people mad still, and that's okay. That's where they're at. They've got to go through their process. But some people are ready for a different way. Okay. And for those are the ones who I'm talking to. All right. So remember that our mother is a part of our story, but she's not the final destination. That goes with anybody. You're allowed to love her. That's most important, and still choose to heal. All right. And so you're not here to carry the pain of the women before here. You're here to before you. You're here to transform it. All right. So very, very important. I hope you guys got some value out of that. Be sure, like I said, to check out my website, holisticandspiritualaf.com. Stay connected, y'all, because we got some amazing things coming up this year. And with that being said, I am out, y'all. Into the next episode.